one of the things I'm trying to do. See, this is the irony of it, because also when you try to do something that can be very much the ego appropriating this idea of mindfulness or whatever, and you don't want that either. But at this point, my level, I guess you can say, I'm trying to approach music as a process as opposed to an outcome.
Hello, fellow beings. Welcome to Tapasya Loading, a safe space to attempt honest, raw, and authentic conversation in homage to the ancient act of stoking a sacred fire. This episode's brought to you by everynowheremusic.com. Yep, you got that right. That's yours truly. So if this is an endeavor you'd like to support, please come and sign up for my newsletter at everynowheremusic.com. Every nowhere or every now here, depending on whichever way you prefer to look at it. There's craploads of stuff you can read up on a history-making artist like Rez Abbasi, including the episode notes here and the podcast. Please do read through. But what you probably won't find much literature on is his heart-centered realness, which I got to experience firsthand the time I finally got to meet him in person in London after over a decade of online correspondence. The graciousness with which he immediately put me on the guest list, the complete absence of any pretentiousness during the after-gig hang, where he spent a good hour talking like long-lost friends, even while the quintessential London promoter/PR types whizzed around, trying to get him to talk to more appropriate candidates. We talked about funny cousins, shooting selfies we couldn't seem to figure out, boxing being more than a blood sport if Miles Davis saw something valuable in it, and promised to continue the conversation when the time was right. So, here we go.
I don't know why, because I think we met in the UK once.
Yeah, and I do live there part-time. London's still kind of my hometown. That's where I grew up.
I can tell by the accent.
About that. Me and my accent, it's a bit of a hodgepodge, quite hybrid. I'd say my base accent probably comes from London. Yeah, you got me there.
Yeah. We're all a bit of a hodgepodge, you know?
Oh, you sound pretty New York, though. Although I was reading up, you grew up in Southern California, didn't you?
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of people from New York think I have a down south kind of accent or even a California accent, which is more the case. But I've been here for longer than I was in Los Angeles. So, you know, it's grown in different ways. It's expanded in different ways. So who knows?
I often wonder if musicians are actually more susceptible to picking up and implementing the different sounds they hear, even in accents and the whole, you know, the vocabulary they pick up.
Yeah, you know, I think I agree with you. I mean, we're just, you know, more sensitive to the listening aspect, the senses. I mean, like if you were blind, right? I mean, your ears would be probably a lot better than they are right now, right? I mean, same with mine. It's just all relative to what you do in life and how, you know, how you move about in life. If you don't have eyes, I mean, if you're blind, then you're going to be listening a lot more carefully to things. And we know that because we know, you know, blind people who have great ears or their sense perceptions shift a little bit.
Jesus, yeah. Have you worked with any blind musicians?
Well, I knew a guitar player. You know, I didn't know him well enough to make that judgment particularly, but I just, you know, it's an assumption, but yet it's an educated assumption because, you know, I've seen documentaries or shows about people who are like that. So,
well, I'm going to use this opportunity to second your suspicion because I work with a blind musician once a year at this residency I do in the Canary Islands. This phenomenal singer pianist called Fabiola Socas, who in her home region, which is the Canary Islands, it's like a very very unique culture of its own, is quite the star, like a national award winner and stuff. And it actually is phenomenal the way she approaches sound, the way she approaches harmony. It's very interesting because this ensemble we play in kind of caters to very diverse levels because it has like a social work aspect to it as well. And she's definitely one of the most advanced. It's crazy, like while we grapple with our sheets and kind of figure out where to fit in, she's like already like ready to hit the stage.
I
And in
know.
a manner which actually seems so much simpler if you think about it. I sometimes wonder, how did we forget to approach music that way?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, we'll never know. But I mean, who knows? We might know, but I mean, if you were, blind from the beginning, or at least from when you're young, I mean, by now we've used our eyes and ears and everything sort of in a similar fashion, and it's a little bit more normalized. So if I went blind tomorrow, I don't know if my ears would actually develop even more. I don't know at this stage of the game.
Well, I'm pretty sure you don't need to be blind to be the brilliant musician you already are.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely a lot of food for thought there.
We all have limitations, so that's, if it's blind or if it's something else, there's something going on that makes life a little bit tough to just run smoothly sometimes, you know what I mean? Especially nowadays. Jeez, man.
Oh, yeah. I'm assuming you are in New York City, right?
Yeah, we're in Harlem.
Wow. How intense is it?
Well, one of the nights there was something really large happening, a protest, and I don't even know if it was a protest. It was just so many cops and so many people right in front of our house, like 114th Street. So that was, I mean, I saw it from my window, which is kind of, crazy. But it's very similar all over the world, at least all over America right now, but even some parts of the world. And it's just an outrage with what's happening, the power struggle between cops and the way they treat minorities generally, but really African Americans or black people in general everywhere. India has a very similar problem, man. I don't know if it's the cops, but the people, a lot of people in India, and not to make a blanket statement, but I was just reading an article last night. If you're black in India, you've got a very similar issue, if not even worse than here in America. It's really...
Oh, fuck yeah. It's nuts. I remember the one time I was at a cafe and this an African girl was just struggling to order her coffee for some reason because the barista wouldn't quite get what she was saying. And I helped her out and we started chatting, and her partner was a soccer player. And a lot of African soccer players go do a residency like a stint in India. So, we got chatting. She was really nice, and I asked her how her experiences have been. It was very fucking embarrassing for me as someone with South Asian roots. It was, I would hang my head in shame. And it made no sense because here I am in Europe always standing up for rights for, people of color. And then I find out what's happening in like the largest country of people of color. And it's like complete cognitive dissonance. Like it makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how India is one of the most spiritual lands on earth, in terms of yoga and meditation, all that, and all that comes with that. But yet it can also be the most trite, superficial place on earth. Really ironic to me. Things we hear that come out of India, or even, Pakistan too. To me, I that's another political ramification. I see those both as one. I don't see India and Pakistan separate. I know a lot of people might, but, I don't.
Not me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I completely share your dilemma. It's a lot to wrap your head around. And technically speaking, like my family's been removed for almost 3 generations now anyway. So my parents are first generation Indians. They came to India as refugees, as toddlers really.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is why I spent the first 6 years of my life traveling in different places of the world, because they were just traveling doctors, getting their start capital, working in different places. And eventually went and settled in India, and a few years later I left. So they're Indian citizens, but as far as my ancestry is concerned, technically I'd be, Bangladeshi. I don't even know what Indian means at this point.
Right. And then Bangladesh is part of Pakistan, so, where does that, it's just interesting how it's really one land. And then, you can, if you really stretch it, you can expand that to the whole entire earth. We're just human, right?
See, that to me sounds like a solution, at least progress towards the same.
Right. Unfortunately, there are a lot of issues that separate us. Religion is one obvious one, but and the belief systems that come with each religion. But politics, which includes greed, and power structures. And it's very complicated to actually consider this whole earth as one unless you're a very enlightened type of spiritual being, or, if you have at least that kind of mentality, which, I think a lot of musicians do, and a lot of artists, in fact.
Yeah.
That's the great thing about art, what it can teach people. But unfortunately, that other side is so skewed and warped and large at this point that we're looking at, hundreds, if not thousands of years before people start making that paradigm shift.
Do we have 1,000 years to spare, though, until we get there?
Yeah. That's a entirely other issue. So
I wasn't attempting to open the whole climate change can of worms, but I was really wondering, like, assuming the climate change, even keeps up with that.
Exactly. And what this pandemic, this virus, is really exposing is how vulnerable we all are.
I agree with you.
So people have been blowing off climate change for a long time. It's not a belief system, really, climate change. It is what it is. It is, true. And we all try and do our little part. None of us are going to solve it just by ourselves. But, excuse me, sorry.
No worries.
But I get a frog in my throat when I think about these things. But
oh, yeah. I'm intimately familiar with that frog.
Yeah. But so this just shows us that a virus can shut down the entire world. What do you think climate change can do?
I feel like I don't really want to think about it at this point.
No, we don't have to go there too much. So these are just basic surface level.
Just to clarify, when I say I feel like I don't want to go there, it doesn't mean it's not a recommendation. I mean, we all need to go there at some point, and I'm hoping we all will, in good time.
You don't have to be overwhelmed by it all day long. I mean, that's not, worrying is a good instigator towards the process. But I mean, if you sit around and worry all day, you're not going to actually get to the process.
So true, man. You struck my interest there when you said music and how it can lead to, for lack of a better term, enlightenment. How has your journey been in this regard? How would you say music gave you that facility to reach that point of looking beyond lines and boundaries and concepts and boxes?
Well, that's a very deep topic, man, and
I got time.
It's an ongoing process, man. It's I see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I have to be honest with you. The rub of being a musician as a pro, either a jazz musician in my case, or what have you, the pressure of performance and the pressure of making the living and, the business aspect of it, the media aspect of it. You need to be sort of in the media to be able to get your stuff out there. All that stuff really kind of deflates the spiritual side for me. And that's what I've been really grappling with for many, many years. And it's interesting we're talking about this because this COVID thing, we've all had to stay home and it's making me think, wow, man, there's a lot of space to think now. It's sort of like without this forcible sitting at home business and not playing gigs, I was constantly on this roll, this sort of adventure that didn't really allow me to sit back and say, what is all this for? I have asked myself those questions many times. I do all the time. But, when you have a gig next week, you kind of blow that question off and like, oh, okay, well, let me just get through this next tour or this next record. I really got to practice, I really got to do all this, or I have to make that phone call, or I have to, whatever. So now there's none of that because, there's no tours happening. I can't be calling people up and asking for, concerts and all that stuff at this point. Though, it's almost laughable. All my 6 or 7 tours have been canceled into December.
Sorry to hear, man.
Yeah, I mean, people are they're going through a lot more than this. So I'm not really, the government is helping us a little bit here for a few months more. So it's all okay right now for Kiran and I, my wife. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the idea that to have music as a spiritual means, okay, I think Coltrane might have gotten there. I think there's a few, Keith Jarrett, there's a few people who might, and I'm just speaking for them. I don't even know if that's really completely true, but for me, it's sort of like this balancing of all this other stuff really, like I said, diminishes the spiritual aspect. So the only time I feel really spiritual is when I'm kind of just sitting home and letting the stuff go and practice. Just not even, I say that practicing, but it's not practicing. It's just emoting. It's just sort of letting the music happen. And that only lasts for, 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes, and I get into it. Then I get tired of my own playing. So that's another obstacle. See, the professionality of an artist, the creativity of an artist also gets in your way. And a lot of this stuff is based on ego. And, I have a strong one. I think most of us do, and we don't even realize it.
Wow, this is so good, man. I find it extremely inspiring to hear you talk this way, an artist of your caliber speaking so vulnerably. And I'm not just saying that to make this podcast sound good. I'm also not surprised because I hear this in your music. I genuinely do.
Wow.
I definitely do. And I'm not sure if you always do, because I know I've been there myself, but you don't always necessarily hear what your music says yourself. Because
absolutely, do both.
In my own experiences, I've written songs 20 years back, which I'm beginning to understand now. If there's one thing I'm increasingly convinced of, that the source of the music comes from someplace way bigger than our egoistic existence. That being said and done, though, I've also started to notice that the ego, which has always been made out to be this devil, I mean, not everything it does is evil. Someone like you who's worked his ass off to get to where he is technically and intellectually, that hard work is also very evident to hear in your music. There's so much deep thought and work, not just thought. It's hard to find fuel for that kind of work, that kind of grind, although I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of that word, without some support from the ego too, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, so look, as I get older, these questions are arising and sustaining themselves a little longer in my sort of head or my body or my gut or wherever you want. Whereas before it was sort of like, yeah, it is what it is, but now I'm sort of calling it out. I'm thinking to myself, okay, wait a minute, is this ego? It's it comes down to one word, man. It comes down to awareness. If you can really be sort of on top of this awareness button in yourself and not just sort of become a sheep for society, because that's so easy, especially these days with the social media. You read all kinds of stuff. You read about yourself. You read about, other people. You're comparing yourself. These are all things that are pulling us the wrong direction. I hate to say it because I'm a victim of that for sure. But I think awareness of just the nuances, the subtleties of your brain, which is really the ego, telling you should do this, you should do that, you should have played this. It sort of all comes into the fold, and it's a matter of just, I guess you can say, separating yourself a little bit from that position. And once again, that cliched word, paradigm shift. I think the paradigm shift within yourself is very important, and not to keep talking about that, but one of the things I'm trying to do, see, this is the irony of it, because also when you try to do something, that can be very much the ego appropriating this idea of mindfulness or whatever, and you don't want that either. But at this point, my level, I guess you can say, I'm trying to approach music as a process as opposed to an outcome.
Beautiful.
And that's the hardest thing, is basically getting away from myself. It's so weird, man.
I hear you, brother. I hear you totally. I mean, you're literally taking the words out of my mouth here. But keep going.
Well, we all think of ourselves as our thoughts in our brain. And man, it's just so not true. It's so the opposite. There's that whole argument of free will. I don't want to get into that because I don't know much about it, but how much free will do we actually have? And I believe in free will myself, but there's people who argue that you don't really have a whole lot of free will at all. That's a philosophical, existential debate that we won't deal with. But the idea is I take from that and I realize, what, maybe there's something to that. Everything I'm doing in life, I get up and I do this, I do that. How much am I really aware of? Or am I just going? Is it just because, okay, my identity is Rez Abbasi, and, I went here, I went to this school, I played with this person, I've got a record out, I've got this and that. I just question all that stuff. I think it's a good thing to separate from that once in a while, if not, as much as you can. So in other words, when I play guitar now, I really try to become aware of the process of playing rather than what can I play? How many things can I do? What chord changes are those? What, all the things that we grew up studying and we constantly used our brain to function as sort of this scholastic kind of way of thinking about music and jazz. And now it's trying to get to the process, which gets to the expression very quickly.
That is amazing.
Something like that.
All of that resonates so deeply with me, man. I mean, I'm pretty euphoric now listening to you speak like that. I'm not just saying that. One of the mantras I've found very useful was a really, really old quote by Quincy Jones. And he said this back in the 80s where, themes like these were almost kind of taboo. Forgive me if I'm not quoting him completely correctly, but I believe he said, get your chops together for the divine to come through.
That is definitely a beautiful quote, energized with the same ideas that we're talking here about. Of course, what is divine is another layer of this. I guess essentially, if you pull away all the scriptures and the dogma that come with them and just point yourself in that one direction, everybody, if they don't get caught up into that, is moving towards the same light. Hopefully. That's a big statement right there. But
it doesn't seem like a big statement at all. In fact, I feel like the whole music industry, and in a way, it's not just our egos we've fallen victims to as artists, but also the music industry and the sheep they've always relentlessly tried to make us to be. And that light has been completely forgotten and neglected by the music industry. Tori Amos once said, you hear the word music industry, you assume it has anything to do with music. And then once you're part of it, you realize that is a very debatable question. My point being that light's been neglected for so long, I don't think we're getting too woo-woo at all addressing it. Especially, since we do share that common South Asian background. Like, South Asian classical music has always kind of, to the best of my knowledge, seen it the other way around. They've always started off with the premise that, you want to do music as a spiritual path. And in order to serve that light, you want to get into that disciplined lifestyle, so you make sure that light is well served. You want to be of service to that light. When I first moved to Europe to study music, I have a somewhat similar academic background. I was in college for 10 years. And I bear the scars for it. I felt so lost because I was like, where is that part of music education being addressed here? Which brings me to how I discovered you. I don't know if you remember how we met, but it was MySpace.
Oh, wow. Are you serious?
Yeah, dude, I'm serious.
What was that? Oh, my.
Yeah, we go back that long. I was in college studying jazz. In a very European white environment of jazz academia. And on the side, I was doing these clandestine sessions with my guitar, trying to figure out if I could hear some of the more Eastern inflected melodies in my head and if I could kind of strike a balance. And I had some recordings up on my MySpace site. And you commented, still remember, you said, wow, you sound wonderful. And what you probably don't know is I spent the next 5 minutes dancing around my kitchen when I read that.
Oh, God.
Because, literally a couple of weeks back, I discovered your music. This was when DownBeat had just started talking about you. And there was that quote from Pat Metheny about how you're, the guitar player to watch out from.
But, yeah, I mean, he did say some really nice things. He sent me a nice email. Go ahead. Yeah, I just don't want to get the wrong words out there.
No, not at all. There are no wrong words on this podcast, man.
But, yeah.
Discovering you, though, you and your music, and I need you to know this, has been an extremely healing experience for me, because at the time I was suffering from severe cultural schizophrenia. Because on one hand, I was in this world of European jazz academia, and the way jazz is taught in Europe is a little different to the US as well. It's almost studied as American classical music, and it can be quite dogmatic at times. And on the other hand, I had this background of having grown up with a lot of Indian classical music. My mother is a dancer. And, I studied some Indian music while I was during my time in India. And I was really grappling so hard to find some common ground of these worlds not being so different after all. At the time, there were a lot of in inverted commas, world fusion, Indian fusion kind of things happening. But a lot of that was just very in formative stages. And personally, without being mean or anything, I've never been a fan of what's going on under that label.
For the most part, me neither.
Yeah, because it's just one culture appropriating the other from my perspective. And then I heard you, and it was exactly what I'd been waiting to hear, like all 20 years of my life till then, or 21 or 22, I can't quite remember.
You remember what record or what music?
Bazaar.
Oh, Bazaar. Oh, okay, that late.
Yeah.
Okay, because I did one called Snake Charmer, believe it or not. So I know that's a funny title, but it's referring more to the Kundalini meditation.
Oh.
But anyway, at the time I probably didn't, realize that. But, that what came before Bazaar. The second record from that band basically was Bazaar.
I'm definitely going to go check Snake Charmer out right after we finish this.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's up on anything for free, but I can always send you something because that's...
Please do, because yes, I noticed like not all of your music is available everywhere. I mean, I still have the CDs I bought back in the day when people bought CDs. Coming back though, it really was an extremely healing experience for me because for the first time I could see someone who's actually gone into the depth of what music is from, at a level almost cellular where it's not about concepts anymore. And you learned rules and you broke them at a level and depth so legit. It was really elevating.
Well, that's great. I appreciate that because that was kind of my goal. I mean, it's a strange thing because I'm on the fence with this. I don't even know where my opinion lies, but I feel like sometimes if you study too much of a thing, a good thing, like Indian classical music, either north or south, or if you study too much, even, jazz or whatever, I think that may... I don't know. I don't know if this is true, but I wonder if that limits your ability sometimes to add your own ideas, or bring out your own personality.
That resonates with me.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know. I would never say don't study anything. I mean, like obviously that's not what I'm saying, but to the point that I would want to sound like a sitar player or something like that. If I studied sitar and brought it to my instrument and worked out all the phrases, I never wanted to really do that because I didn't want to appropriate that sound so much, especially on an instrument like the guitar, which it's not the same. It's just not the same can of worms. So it was a matter of just listening to a lot of stuff, asking a few questions here and there, maybe going to a clinic, workshop, talking to other Indian musicians, Indian American musicians, Pakistani, and sort of just grappling with all that and sort of, I guess, trusting that intuitive part of me that knows what music is, instead of that brain part of me that probably would serve as a limitation. The heart and the whole body has got a lot of personality, and as much as the brain does, and the brain thinks that it's the thing that's doing all the work, but it's not. So we know the gut has a lot of influence on our entire body. So that kind of thing. I don't know if that was kind of vague the way I was saying it, but I'm also trying to think about it myself.
No, not vague at all, man. Quite au contraire. Not vague in the least. That makes so much sense to me. So many important points there. Number one, not getting to a point where you're studying something for the sake of studying that, because that runs the risk of appropriating the same. And just remembering the brain is just one part of the entire ecosystem. There's also the heart, there's the gut. There's so much information in there that's so valuable, at least for me as a musician and an artist.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, not at all. Please, you're the guest.
And that's, of course, not saying that it's black or white. I mean, you can study something with the mind and the heart. I mean, most Indian classical musicians are very beautiful in the way they play their instruments, and they're studying very deeply at the same time. So I believe in that for sure. I mean, I've done a lot of homework in different areas, but I think like Charlie Parker said, learn your instrument and then forget it. And I think if you just work off of that, you think some of the magic in terms of trying to create a sound of your own to some degree without doing the ego, let's just say adding to the vernacular. That's what I'm interested in mostly. It's not like, my sound, Rez Abbasi. More like, well, if I sound like everybody else, then I'm not adding anything to the music. With my upbringing, I have an opportunity to delve into all these things sort of through the DNA. You too. We were all brought up with brown people around us, and I was brought up in America, so all that serves the music.
I have a memory of you which I found very inspiring in a different context. I remember watching an interview of yours. Hopefully I'll be able to cycle back to how that's relevant to what you just said. This was when, independent interviewers and podcasts were just about starting to hit off. And this was an interview you did on YouTube with a very random music journalist, no one well known, who clearly wasn't necessarily very familiar with the jazz vernacular as such, outside of venue, wherein she asked you, wow, your music, it sounds a lot like Led Zeppelin.
That was a long time ago, man.
That was a very long time ago. The reason I address this, though, that the part I found most inspiring is how respectful you were when you answered. A lot of jazz musicians have no clue how to react to a situation like that, wherein someone, a music journalist, comes up to them and says something they've been programmed to think as inappropriate or ignorant or whatever, for lack of a better term, which is not what I'm calling her. But to just respect. And I remember your answer was, I don't want to take that away from you. And then you went on to elaborate more deeper connections. And I want to say that, for me, immediately set you apart, like a class apart from so many musicians who've fallen prey to the dogmatic structures of the genres they're supposed to belong to. What would you say has been the driving force behind that?
Can you contextualize it even more, like the driving force behind
the openness, behind your ability to so naturally and organically respect someone else's perspective without judging them?
I was just caught up on the Led Zeppelin thing. I was thinking about Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, it was a funny interview.
Yeah, just funny. But so are you saying, like, how is it that I sort of have been influenced by groups like that?
No, quite the contrary. Most jazz musicians I know, especially at the time, this was when internet wasn't that big and people could get away with being a lot more nasty. And jazz musicians have had a reputation of being a little arrogant, they're a little snobbish.
Right.
But you were really kind and open and just very cool about it. And you didn't seem insulted for having someone say your music sounds like Led Zeppelin.
I get you. Yeah. So that's what I thought you were saying. But there was no sort of deep answer to that other than maybe there's a section of the music that she heard that is influenced by Led Zeppelin. I mean, I did grow up on rock and roll. I think part of it is because I'm a guitar player. If I was a saxophone player, maybe not. Maybe I would have a little bit more of a funky attitude, but I don't even see why.
I like how you say funky attitude.
Yeah. I don't know what the purpose of that attitude would be. I mean, look, here's one thing a lot of journalists do, okay? And this is, I'm not into this part of it. It's not her, but it's just in general. Mm-hmm. They'll take like a minute of a tune, and then they'll write about that, or they'll remember that in your conversation. And it's like, man, that was just a minute of the whole thing. Like, you're gonna, like, sometimes you see reviews, and they're talking about this one section of a tune on a 60-minute record, and they're making it sound as if the record is influenced by that one, whatever that one thing was influenced by. So if it was Led Zeppelin, well, Rez Abbasi is influenced by Led Zeppelin. This record is influenced by Led Zeppelin. That's when I feel like it's really taken out of context, and it's unfortunate. But in that circumstance, I think, that was only one of the questions. So she was excited about that. And you know what? I would have to say I am influenced by Led Zeppelin. I mean,
awesome.
I'm influenced by rock and roll. I mean, I definitely don't live under a rock. How could you? No pun intended. But how are you not influenced by 70s rock and roll, 60s, 70s rock and roll, Beatles? Then Led Zeppelin, then someone like a band like Van Halen or something. How do you grow up in this environment and not hear any of that stuff? Because the fact of the matter is, once you hear that stuff, you're influenced by it.
Absolutely.
You don't have to buy all records and sit around and listen for 10 hours a day. So I see nothing wrong with that. But when you're writing it journalistically in a review that's only 100 words or something, then it's a drag. But if it's if it's a broad stroke in a larger interview, that's fine.
There's so much to learn from what you just said, man. And also, I think the point I'm trying to kind of approach with what I just said and asked you is, it was a very apparent reflection of how broad-minded you genuinely are as a human being and as a musician. How you've done a fantastic job of not falling prey to dogmatic systems of looking at music. And I was wondering, would you say your upbringing, the kaleidoscope of cultures you grew up amidst, may facilitated that broad-mindedness?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a reflection of this, dual identity, multicultural upbringing. I mean, I didn't face a lot of racism when I was younger, and I guess I'm lucky for that because, I could have growing up in the early 80s, or late 70s, early 80s in Los Angeles as a brown guy, I could have, but and especially sort of this, what people thought was, we're going through tensions with Iran and all that stuff. I was called a few things and that's it, but it's like, it never bugged me. I definitely felt like I was American, but having many relatives that still were coming from Pakistan back and forth, and along with my parents, they sort of carried their traditions or my original traditions along with them. So I was very influenced by that, by being surrounded by them. If they were singing a song, there it was. If they were listening to some Bollywood movie, there it was. I was listening to it. So, I was aware of this dual cultural aspect, but most of my friends were American, whether it was Chinese American, white guy, black guy, whatever, they were all American, and we surfed, we did all kinds of, we went motorcycle riding. So, listened to Led Zeppelin and Rush. So it was a very American upbringing, but I think the idea that I had both these areas to work off of, like at home, it would be a totally different thing than when I went outside. So that is not usually the case for everybody. So I think that helped me keep a diverse space in my mind and like open to diversity kind of philosophy.
Beautiful. When did jazz happen?
Well, it's kind of a weird story, but I had a friend that was, he was barely a friend at the time, but 1 year older than me, and he was playing rock, and I was playing rock when I was 14 or so, 15, and I didn't really discover jazz until I met him at a gas station. It was really weird. We were both pumping gas, and I was like, "Oh, hey, Lon, what's up?" And I haven't seen you for a while. And he goes, "Oh yeah, pretty good. I'm getting into jazz and classical music." I said, "Wow, what is that? What do you mean? What happened to Rush and all these other bands and these garage bands? We were all in garage bands playing at parties. It's like, aren't you in that anymore?" And so he was like, "No, I'm going to prepare to go to USC, University of Southern California, and get into their program." And I think he was 16, I was 15, or no, I was 16, he was 17. So. Because we were both driving. And the strange thing is, I had this sort of competition thing back then, which we all try and shed away after a while, but we all seem to have it. It's the ego. And just the fact that he was studying this stuff, I figured, you know what, I'm going to look into that. I said, can we get together? And we got together, and the first thing he showed me was what his teacher was showing him, which was from the Omni book, Over.With from Charlie Parker. And, and he said, "This is what I'm working on." He played it, and it sounded really goofy to me. That happens to be one of the more goofy tunes that Charlie Parker wrote in my ears anyway. It's great. I mean, I still love it, but I don't blame myself at 15 or 16 years old to think that was goofy.
Not at all. I don't think anyone needs to feel the need to blame themselves for feeling what they do when they hear music.
Yeah. I mean, something like Blues for Alice, that doesn't sound goofy to me at all. So it went from there to another friend who took me to see, because he knew I was into Eddie Van Halen, he took me to see Alan Holdsworth when I was 16. And so and then this other guy, Lon, one of my best friends, he's no longer with us, but he also took me to see Ella Fitzgerald in Pass when I was 16. So,
Wow.
yeah. So you're talking about diversity. There's a lot of diversity within jazz itself, right there.
I know, right? It's actually the original world music, so to speak, which in itself is a weird genre in itself.
Exactly. But so I discovered jazz sort of full blown, like all aspects of it. Because if you think about Joe Pass and then you think about Alan Holdsworth, it's like they can both be considered jazz musicians. I mean, I know Holdsworth is treading on some other things, but if you want to put them in that spectrum, they're like polar opposites of the same similar world.
Yeah.
I mean, very polar opposites, but if you want to really make that stretch. But it was very different than what I had been listening to beforehand. So it was a night and day. And then I quit my band. I started practicing all day long then when I was 16. That's what helped my parents put me through college because they said, boy, I mean, if you could sit around and practice 6 hours a day and you quit your band and you're not partying anymore, you must be serious about it.
Wow, that's a really uplifting story. So over.With was officially the first standard you attempted to play?
Yeah, first jazz tune. I don't know if I actually played it, but I know
it's a pretty heavy tune. It's a pretty heavy head.
I mean, I did eventually, and I played the solo because I went to the same teacher eventually. So, but that day I didn't play it. I probably played like Blue Bossa or something like that before that.
But I'm assuming that even as a rock guitar player at the time, you were pretty technically adept then.
Yeah, I was fluid. My chops were good. I used to play Eruption at parties.
Wow.
Yeah, we would go through our Rolling Stones, our Rush tunes. We went through all the gamut. And then I would have my feature of playing Eruption. So I did that. That was, 15, 16 years old. But then, like I said, that same year I discovered jazz, and all that other stuff was over with for a while. I became a jazz snob big time.
I know the feeling intimately, that phase. Will you please take us through that first jam session with over.With to, let's say, Manhattan College of Music? What happened in between?
Well, a lot happened in between. I mean, I went to USC, Southern California, and there was a guitar program there, which was exceptional, and I've never seen anything like it up to this day. I mean, the teacher I had, he passed away, unfortunately, too, was Paul LaRose, and he went to school with Metheny and Jocko in Miami, and he sort of had that kind of inclination with jazz, which was this kind of open harmonic sensibility. And yeah, it was just beautiful studying with him for a couple of years. Also, a gentleman who's still with us, Joe DiOrio, was part of that, later became part of that guitar department. So between those two guys, I got a lot. But then I felt like I wasn't playing enough. I was just really practicing, anywhere from 6 to 10 hours, at a stretch. But it was sort of like, where am I going with this? I mean, there's nothing to do with this. I play with a few guitar players. That's about it. And a rhythm section once in a blue moon at the school. So there's a gentleman named Terry Plumeri. He's a great bass player and composer. And he was friends with John Abercrombie. And we played a few gigs, and he said, wow, you really sound like you got a New York thing happening, like, John Abercrombie. I said,
Wow.
I think I have heard of John Abercrombie, and I barely knew he was playing, because I was really into Jim Hall at that time, so, and I still am. But, so, John Abercrombie, he kind of said, you should hook up with him and move to New York. I was like, wow. So between he and Joe DiOrio also said, Rez, you should move to New York. Between those two guys and the fact that I was feeling kind of like I wasn't improving because I wasn't playing with anybody, I took a semester off and sat around and really was kind of depressed and didn't do anything. And then that was when I made my decision to move to Manhattan School of Music, which was a great decision because now suddenly I'm playing with a lot of people, and it was sort of the opposite of what I was doing at USC. I wasn't just practicing all day. I was actually communicating skills, and yeah, that's the nutshell story.
Wow, that's beautiful. Would you say John Abercrombie has been a strong influence in your playing? I ask because I have a soft corner for him. I'm going to get into a story in a bit.
Yes and no. I mean, because the Jim Hall influence, I've been influenced by, all the people who sort of taken his pointers and gone their direction, which is Abercrombie, Metheny, Bill Frisell, certainly, and John Schofield.
I love those guys.
Yeah, John Schofield and McGoodrick. It's strange that they're all white. I just realized that
I just realized that too. Never actually thought about it. Which is kind of beautiful, right? The fact that music never actually gets you to think about it.
Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, I don't, I don't see color in music, honestly. I just, I mean, I'm also very influenced by Wes Montgomery and George Benson, and then there's people like
Metheny too, right? Sorry, I keep interrupting you. Sorry about the latency, man.
No, as is Metheny, and I studied with a guy named Rodney Jones who is very much from that school, and that helped in certain avenues also with my playing, But I definitely veered towards, a Jim Hall approach, and so Abercrombie was influential. I studied with him 2 or 3 lessons, and he was influential in many ways. I think I sort of, with all these guys, I sort of stopped listening to them many years ago because I wanted to find my own sort of way. And maybe only recently have I gone back to a couple records and listened back and said, what was about this record that I really loved? And boom, there it was. Oh, yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. But for 20 years, I probably haven't really listened to any of these guys.
Beautiful, man. I had the opportunity to study with John Abercrombie for a week. He was doing a week workshop at college. What a lovely man. I know, right? Like the way I met him, I was just walking downtown. This is a small town down south in Germany called Freiburg, which is where I studied. And see John Abercrombie walking across the street. And I'm like, hey, you're John Abercrombie. And I'm not exaggerating. He takes a second, looks up into the sky, like he has to process that, and looks back. Yeah, you're right. I am.
Yeah. He's had an amazing sense of humor, man. Oh my God.
Oh yeah. So subtle.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely. And the reason why I said yes and no to his influence is because there are different gradations of influence that I get from people. Coltrane, Keith Jarrett, Jim Hall. Those are my 3 huge, probably say Miles Davis too, but those 3 are really my huge influencers in jazz, at least. They're just general music. And then there's another level, which is people like Abercrombie and Frisell and all these guys who have their thing also. But it's more of how much did I get in, deeply into it,
At which point during this journey with the jazz world, at which point did you start exploring the South Asian side to your music?
Well, there's a brief story with that. I've always liked what sort of came out of my parents' television when they were watching those South Asian movies or whatnot. And I always recognized that as something I needed to look into. But I was so involved with rock and then jazz, those kind of overrode that area. But one day there was a house party that we got invited to very close to my house. Like we could have walked there. And Indian friends of my parents. And I walk in, and I was 18 years old, as I recall, and very naive. And there was sitting down Zakir Hussain and Shiv Kumar Sharma.
Wow.
Yeah.
Straight to the top, huh?
Exactly. And tell me about it. Oh my God. And I didn't know who these guys were. I was just like, oh, hi, how are you? And we were, eating a little bit. So then they performed, and then I realized, oh my God, I mean, when you're 18, you're really, enamored by technique, I mean, you really are. I mean, we all are still, but when you're young, you're like, oh my God, what chops, right? And so Zakir started playing. I was like, oh my God, who is this guy? I thought Holsworth, I thought like Van Halen and Holsworth were what they still are, of course, but it's just, it was just amazing. So, and Shiv Kumar Sharma, amazing. So I started just talking to Zakir afterwards, very nice. And then later on, I realized who that was, of course, who both of them were. And then I saw them both several times afterwards. But that was my initial jolt into Indian classical music. And from there, studied with a gentleman who studied with, I think, Ravi Shankar, Harihara Rao in Pasadena. So I started going to his house and just to try and understand some of the rhythmical cycles and aspects of the rhythms. But he would talk about some other things also with Indian music, and that lasted for a few months on and off. It was kind of that thing that just directed me into Indian classical music, those two experiences.
This runs the risk of sounding like a slightly stereotypical question, but how deeply would you say the rhythmic aspect to it has influenced you overall?
I don't think that's stereotypical. I mean, I think as a jazz musician, most jazz musicians who have studied Indian music have studied the rhythm aspect. I don't think many have actually studied the ragas and whatnot. It has definitely influenced me. Now, I'm not one of these guys, who sit around clapping all day long and, work highs. And, there are a few of those, I think that's amazing. I guess I'm too lazy for that. I don't know. There's so many other things to do in life that I'm happy with a few.
You're not lazy, man.
No, but I'm happy with I could push myself more into that channel and really get more into it and probably get more out of it. But I tend to just be happy with a few sort of rhythmical compositions that I can work out, and that's it. Like, I don't need the whole book of ideas in my head. I kind of wish I did, but that's just not me, I guess.
It's also like dedicating your life to the Indian school of rhythm is almost like a life project anyway. It's like a full-time job. But I ask with a very specific question, man, because I've noticed how, and I'm going to have to try and figure out a way to say this without sounding like a dick. I've noticed how you've focused more on the organic side of the Indian rhythmic culture, because Indian classical music, there's also like a class system happening there. Like, most of the focus Indian rhythms have enjoyed have been the more complex mathematical sides to it. Exceptions prove the rule, of course. But there's also a very grounded, raw, tribal side to Indian rhythms too, which doesn't really get talked about a lot. And to be fair, a lot of Indian musicians, in my experience, have always tried to cash in on the complexities that their studies have familiarized them with by default. But I've noticed the way you've implemented that South Asian Indian rhythmic side has always stressed on the organic and not on the cerebral. Has that been a conscious decision, or would you say it's just been something that happened with the flow?
I think both. There's that aspect I'm talking about where, I call it lazy, but I know that's being rude to myself. It's not completely lazy or anything. It's just, I can definitely use some more lessons with this stuff, most definitely in conical, the South Indian rhythm aspect, because I have friends that do get into it, and they're like guitarists and pianists, and they seem to know a lot more than me about specific things. But I think you're right. I think you're on something, that there's something organic to not actually delving heavily into it. Like I said, I'm on the fence. I don't know which one's right or wrong or whatever. But there's definitely something, the way I approach jazz is not to imitate a Coltrane or a Keith Jarrett or Jim Hall or who have you. Learn from the essence of what they're doing, not the derivative notes exactly. And there's a fine line between that, because you really need to learn the notes too. But, that's the way I've approached jazz. I feel like there are only 12 notes plus the octaves on our instrument, right? Unless you're a microtonal person. But, I'm a human being. Why can't I just come up with my own stuff, just like everybody else did? I know there's traditions to follow and all that. And, okay, I learned that. But now that I learned that, I definitely don't need to emphasize that learning. That's the way I looked at Indian music, or at least the rhythm aspect of the rhythmical. Because I would be in many bands and they would have charts, and I'd have to learn T-highs and all kinds of things. And I figured, well, if I learned it to perform it like I have, that's enough. Like, I don't have to memorize this stuff. I don't have to, make 20 variations on it. I've learned a handful of T-highs. I get what it feels like. I'm sure you do too by now. If I can sort of, for lack of a better word, not imitate, but stretch that that experience a little bit into my own by using the essences of all this stuff, then I think it might come out differently.
I hear you.
And it might not come out on the downbeat. You know what I mean? That every Tihai ends on a downbeat, which is
Absolutely
great. And it's like, that's just an example, though. It's great that it ends on a downbeat. And that's the rhythmical cadence that we're talking about, that we hear. But what if I just took the idea of the Tihai and the whole syncopation of it? That's what, the Tihais are based on. You can hear the syncopation within the phrase. What if I just focused on syncopation and not landing on the one, but yet took the essence of Tihai? So those kinds of things are what I kind of work with, and if they don't come out, they don't come out. But if they come out well and I like it, it doesn't have to be a Tihai, like legit.
Yeah. I also see a certain strain or a certain approach happening in these past 20 years. Konakol isn't as exotic anymore. It's almost becoming like a universal language. Most musicians most jazz musicians anyway, know what Konakol is.
Absolutely.
And it's very interesting how there's already a bit of a vaguely marked division between the two groups who are approaching it in very different ways. And this divide has existed in India as well the whole time, because I don't know how much you've gone into it, but like Indian rhythmic philosophies do have a bit of a divide. Like there's the folk rhythm, and then there's the intellectualized, like the complex classical rhythms. And their approaches and maybe even roots, I don't know if roots are the right word, have been quite different. And just to clarify, I love both.
Yeah.
Indian folk rhythms have been such an underrated and such an underdog. And they actually are the roots on which classical music has been based on, at least partially. And they never really got enough credit. And also learning a Tihai or, 21/8 or something, is easier for a certain type and to learn on the surface without actually getting into the depth of it. I know that sounds extremely counterintuitive, maybe even judgy, and that's not where I'm getting at though. But I just find it kind of repeating a certain paradigm of, okay, I'll just do my Konakol course now and learn to calculate this rhythm and just, finish that course and leave calling myself an qualified Konakol musician or whatever it is you call after qualifying in a course like that. It irks me a little. It irks me how it's being approached. But I guess it's that approach to rhythm has been divided throughout time. I mean, I don't know how your experiences have been, probably way more diverse and way more intense. But I seem to run into two very definite types of musicians, one who approach rhythm from their gut and the other who approach from their head. And then there's my favorite who use both. And you fall under that category from my point of view.
No, I hear you. Now, when you say folk music rhythms and stuff, are you talking about Rajasthanian or like what other folk?
All over, man. Like, that's exactly it. It's like an entire study of its own. I toured with a gentleman called Tonmai Bose who used to play with Ravi Shankar as well. And for a year in this project he called Tal Tantra. I was just guesting on it for a bit. I was a little out of place, to be honest, with the entire approach. But one of the things I really loved about what he was trying to do was revive some of these folk rhythms. So he actually went into these like obscure Bengali villages and found like a dholki player. It's a dholki you can only learn from that family he came from because it was literally dying out. And he was about to give up playing this dholki because he couldn't afford to feed his family anymore playing it. So he was going to go switch professions to ironing clothes or something. So he actually went and got him out of there and went on tour with him all over the world. He played at the Bowl, man, like the
Hollywood Bowl?
Yeah. He took him from there and going to play the Hollywood Bowl. And that's just one example of one obscure village in one state in India. And each of these villages all over the subcontinent have their own traditions. And none of them are being preserved and are dying out.
I see your point. So the emphasis is on Konakol and Carnatic kind of music. And
as strange as it sounds, if you take in the entire diversity of what the subcontinent has to offer, what we get to hear most of the time is actually just the surface, really, and almost to the point of becoming generic now. Ooh, I think I might have made some enemies there.
Yeah, no. But the thing is, here's the deal. I mean, South Indian Carnatic rhythms are definitely useful in many ways. The system is untouchable. It's just an amazing system, incomparable. Sorry, and it's just an amazing system. But it's different. The performance of it sometimes can overshadow the depth of it, meaning that, like you said before, an immature Carnatic musician might just throw in all kinds of stuff, just like an immature jazz drummer, throw in all kinds of their patterns because it's a mental game. So it becomes this, oh, check this out. Oh, yeah, check this out. I mean, I remember playing with someone that's kind of noted, and we were doing this, hybrid kind of project. And this guy would just come in like burning on every single thing that he would play. And the rest of the musicians were like, man, that's so inappropriate. What are you doing, man? Like, you got to listen to, we had arguments, at rehearsals, and finally we made up. But I mean, it was so inappropriate that he would just come in with the.
I hear you.
And we're like, man, that was about it. We're like, dude, that's about it.
So I got to ask you, I can't let you go without asking, how did you handle it? How did you manage to make that work? Could you make it work?
It took a lot of hair pulling. We had to raise our voices a little bit when it just wasn't sinking in. I mean, we're trying to be
Indian,
but we have a timeline. We have to get this stuff together in, like, let's say 5 days, and every time this dude comes in, he's doing this, and it's sort of like the rest of us are looking at each other. Man, that's not, it's in front of the beat. It's like, and he's a great player, and so. But what I'm trying to say, what I'm emphasizing here is that it's the training of having such amazing rhythms and not sort of taking a step back and saying, now, how do I utilize these so it helps the overall music? And that's what jazz musicians are really good at. And some Indian musicians are great at that too. But sometimes, because the rhythmical structures are so heavy and deep, they get lost into that,
Yeah, I think like one of the most intricate arts is not just about having good time, but also the art of figuring out, okay, here we are together. What's the time that we've all agreed upon, and how quickly can I grab onto that agreed time that we agreed upon together?
Exactly.
I feel like that's an issue that's only been addressed in the very recent past. Previously, in so many genres, I don't know how your experiences have been. You've obviously worked with an entirely different league of musicians, but I've been witness to so many arguments on who's on time and who's not, pun intended.
I know. Yeah.
It's crazy how people forget, and this is a reflection of our entire world. It could circle back to what we started off this conversation with, this whole idea of objective time, like this objective truth. No, there is no objective truth. There is no objective correct time. It's about, how close can we come to agreeing upon where our collective time works.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, now, I mean, just to harken back on the idea of this guy playing, it's not a blanket statement, like not everybody's like this in jazz or Indian music. Obviously, it's not a comparative thing. But I find with jazz, the mentality sometimes is more from the percussionist aspect to shape the music. And with sometimes, not always, very rarely, you will find either in jazz drumming or Indian drumming that the person is just too caught up into the actual rhythmical foundation and doesn't shape the music. So it happens, and that was one experience that I had.
I got to get a little nerdy, though, because I don't want to let this opportunity go. Would you say what you just described, might have something to do with the fact that Indian music, most of it has been linear by nature traditionally, whereas Western has been more vertical?
Linear meaning like...
monophonic?
I see. Yeah, melodic. I would hesitate to even comment on that because I haven't really thought of it that way. But I think you're onto something. I mean, it could be because of that. There's not the harmonic content that's moving also, although, I think it's deeper than that. I think it has to do with just with the mentality. I mean, like I said, like Carnatic music, for instance, the rhythm, like you can play those rhythms all day long at home, and because they're so deep and they're so amazing that you can get stuck in that, just like a jazz musician, for instance, not even a drummer, but like let's say a guitarist, can get really so stuck into playing licks and scales that are incredible that when that person gets on the bandstand, it's sort of not starting from the bottom up. It's starting from sort of the middle. Okay, here's me. This is what I do. And you know what I mean? It's like, instead of starting from the bottom up and saying, okay, this is a fresh start, forget about who I am. What does the music ask for, and what does it need? And that's the best place, I think, in any kind of genre of music to start from.
That's a very compassionate perspective. That I really love the way you put that.
I think it mitigates any sort of other aspects, ego or not. And not all this stuff is ego, but it's just training, It's the way you're trained. And it happens in all genres. There's always somebody on the bandstand that is sort of trying to take over, but I mean, rarely now because for me, because I don't play with people like that much. But, experientially all throughout my years, I can point out many concerts like that.
So when you choose the musicians you work with, when you're working on your albums, what are you looking out for?
I'm of this school, if it's even a school, that I like to play with different people. I'm not one of these guys who has the same band for 10, 20 years, That's also a good thing. I mean, I have one group that did 3 records, so I guess that spanned over 10 years. And then I have another band that did 2 records, and then another band that did 2 records. So I have had that, but I generally like to play with other people and get their input on my music. So I sort of hire different people for different projects. And the main thing I look for, I think, is spontaneity, in their playing. If I know they're playing, if they're not sort of playing the same way on every tune or playing lines that I've heard everywhere else. Originality. Those are a couple strong elements, spontaneity and originality. And also probably, of course, they've got to be nice, reasonably good people. I'm not looking for a best friend, but I definitely don't want any attitudes. That helps.
Beautiful. I love that you mentioned that and you actually explicitly kind of addressed that issue. Yeah, underrated, I find.
Yeah, definitely. And it helps if the person's a composer also. I like that. If they play as if they're a composer, put it that way. Mm-hmm. They don't have to have like a book of compositions necessarily, but if like drummers, for instance, I play with a lot of drummers who don't write music, but they play as if they're composing for what you wrote, and it's adding something compositionally to that. So that's very essential too.
That makes a lot of sense. What's it like working with Kiran's band? That's like a whole different vibe, isn't it?
It is, but it's taught me so much. It's I can't even kind of even put into words how that's helped me. Her writing is really special. I mean, it's her singing too, but her writing is, there are a lot of Indian singers, but they don't write. I know. Yeah, they sort of do their Bollywood thing or what have you, guzzles. And she used to do guzzles, but now she's been writing for at least 12 years, 15 years, her own stuff. And it's a pleasure to arrange that because I have to learn all her melodies. So I ask her what raga it is in and what are the emphasized notes, or I can just hear that myself. And from there, she's very open for me to harmonize it in any way I want. So sometimes I come up with these really like Thelonious Monk type of voicings, really interesting kind of crunchy sounds on the guitar. And she's like, oh, I love that. And I almost did it as a joke. And it's like, it surprises me. A lot of Indian musicians actually embrace sort of this dissonance that we in the West think is dissonance.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so I've done that many times and I've been surprised. What, you like that? You really like that? Yeah, it's beautiful. It's like, wow. If this was a Western singer-songwriter, they would have said, oh, those are wrong notes. those are weird notes. Those are, whatever. So that's a beautiful thing. And then she lets me stretch. Another thing great about her music now, in fact, in recent years, she's been influenced by West African music. Desert.
Oh, wow. The reason I react to that the way I did, because that makes so much sense to me. That's actually part of what I was trying to get at when I was trying to address folk rhythms in India. There are a lot of parallels there to certain parts of African folk music, which I've been fascinated by. Just on a random tangential on the side. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, absolutely not interrupting. That's been really great because I've worked with a few bands from there, and because she's used a couple of them on her records and she's played with them in some of their groups. So that's been, the guitar work has been definitely influential in the last 10, 12 years on me. And one thing that's so different from that guitar work than in jazz, and she reminds me of this all the time, is when I'm playing too many notes, I'm not milking the notes as much. I'm playing too many different chromatics. These are things I do in jazz all the time when I'm playing over standards and everything. But she sort of reminds me all the time, no, keep that sort of, that rhythmical feel in there, in whatever you're playing, that specific sort of downbeatish rhythmical feel, like James Brown always used to talk about the downbeat, right?
Yeah, I hear you.
That kind of funk foundation. So she reminds me of that, and then also when I start ripping on my notes, she's like, "Oh no, keep that out of it." So it's on, for the most part, 80% of her repertoire is like that. So it's a great lesson for me, because otherwise I would just be playing like I play all the time, which is fine also, but this is expanding my playing in a different way.
I gotta be honest with you, man. I mean, #couple goals. I find it extremely inspiring how the two of you really enhance each other's music. I haven't known Kiran's music as long as I've yours, but I've subscribed to both of your channels now. And in fact, I'd love to talk to her too sometime if she's game.
Of course, yeah. Her recent one, 7 Billion, came out about a year and a half ago, but I'm really happy with how those arrangements came out and how, the hybridity really stands out in that one, the way
Very much so. I also love what she's done on your music too, like what you do on her music and what she does in yours, but in a way where each of your individual artistic identities stands so strong and rooted. It's super inspiring.
Yeah, it's unique that we're sort of this Indo-Pak, couple.
Oh yeah, there's that angle too. See, I hadn't even thought of that. What's that like? Did it ever get hairy?
No. I mean, it's our parents both were in partition. Her dad was in Pakistan when he had to leave. My dad was in India when he had to leave to go to Pakistan. So he was actually born near Bombay. So all the stuff crosses over. But we recently did something for a Pakistani arts platform called Salt Arts, and so they were kind of pushing that thing on it, for promotion. They were saying this is a real Indo-Pak couple living. We can all get along through arts. That whole thing. So it just kind of stuck with me after that. I was like, yeah, that's true. We are. If you live in India or Pakistan, you may not think that Indian and Pakistani people can be married and create art, and yet.
It's heartbreaking and ridiculous, right? This whole divide, it's just so fucking ridiculous. And
it's brainwashed. I mean,
if a cheesy, absolutely. If a cheesy label like Indo-Pak can at least make good things happen, I'll stand for it. What the heck?
Yeah, I know. What are you gonna do? Yeah, no. I mean, I'm in a trio with Rudresh Mahanthappa called Indo-Pak Coalition.
Oh shit! I totally forgot about that. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Okay, no, but that's at the first he was. Should we name it it's his name, but I mean, I was like, yeah, what the hell, man? I mean, Indo-Pak Coalition.
It's crazy. I had no idea. It's only I was recently chatting to a Pakistani friend of mine. If you have a Pakistani passport, you basically can never enter India unless you're a diplomat or something.
Well, I had that situation. 3 of my tours got canceled in India because of that.
No way.
Yeah, 3 times I couldn't go. But now I have a certificate saying that I'm no longer connected to Pakistan.
But wait, you're an American citizen, aren't you?
Yeah, but I was born in Pakistan, so my passport says born in Pakistan. So once that's
Jesus,
once
you're
that's there,
kidding.
yeah, they say nope. Well, they didn't say nope. They just said you have to wait 6 months. And I'm like, well, I'm supposed to be there in a month and a half from now, and yeah, that kind of thing. So I have a paper that's a renunciation of my Pakistani citizenship, which is ironic because I'm not even a citizen of Pakistan, but that's the way it works. And so I haven't tried it yet, but that's what India said you need to have. And so I had some contacts in Pakistan, so I got it done miraculously, I suppose. But because I don't even have a Pakistani passport, so they were saying you need to show your Pakistani passport. I'm like, what? I don't have one. You know, I was 4 years old when we moved to America. So we haven't tried it, but there has been no reason really to go to India yet since I got that, which was about 4 years ago.
I don't even have a reaction to that, man. Like, I don't even know what to say to that.
It's pretty ridiculous. It sort of happened after that 9/11 of India, the Taj Mahal got, those guys started killing everybody. After that, the shit went down.
Wow, to actually block an American citizen on the basis of their date of birth. I thought like a passport from a country that powerful kind of makes you exempt from that kind of discrimination. But I guess
they use their imaginations and then they believe it. That's the problem. I mean, this is besides the point, but I'm not a Muslim, so it doesn't say that on my passport. So again, if you're from Pakistan, you're a Muslim. That's another thing that they're sort of putting on there.
It's been dark the past few, like the recent developments, the political landscape. I don't think I'm qualified enough to make an official comment on it, but I do know that it feels very, very wrong to me, and I do hope that we can look forward to times where it'll be something we can laugh about.
Yeah, and you've been doing okay. I mean, I see some things that you put up, and they sound great, man. I mean, I really dig them. You got
thanks, man.
A lot of music in you.
Cheers, brother. It means a lot, and it really does. You're one of the very few people whose opinions I hold in extremely high regard. So please know that means I'm going to go do a little dance later on after this for that. No, seriously. Yeah. I've been trying to stay productive. It's been a little crazy since the COVID thing. Yeah. My label, who based in the US, by the way, in California actually, they're going through some major restructuring, so I'm waiting to see where that leads to. Since the COVID hit, we were all going through uncertain times regarding everything, really. And all my tours have obviously been cancelled as well. Japan, Indonesia, US. I was supposed to be in New York right now, by the way.
Oh, damn.
This conversation with you is some source of solace. And one of the first things I would have obviously done was hit you up. But at least we get to do this. And I have no idea when I'll be on stage again. And my tour plan's nothing close to the kind of business yours is. But I am a little earnest and a little anxious about when I'll get to be on stage again.
Financially, you're okay right now?
Yeah, but I'm quite privileged, I got to say, because I have a teaching gig with the city council here where I live. That's what keeps me in Germany. I'm glad this is where I got to do the whole lockdown thing, because I have my studio spaces here where I can go work. And also my life in Germany is pretty isolated anyway, so I didn't have to go through any major lifestyle changes.
Yeah, I know what you mean about that part of it.
Yeah?
I mean, yeah. It's like, it's hard not to go to a restaurant and all that stuff, but we've eaten here like 2.5 months straight. I think 2 days ago, we got some Brussels sprouts from a place to go. But other than that, we've been cooking here. So it's tough. But as far as the musician's life, when I'm not on tour, I'm kind of just sitting at home all the time, or teaching once in a while. But they come to me, or I do sessions. But there's definitely something missing. I mean, I'm not saying I just sit here on my couch, but doing sessions alone is like a nice, okay, you're out of the house, you're in someone else's place. You hang out with the musicians, and then you come back home and you feel refreshed. There's not much of that right now, feeling refreshed, Yeah. Going to the park for a half an hour, that's refreshing, but it's not the same thing. You don't feel like you've accomplished anything.
I think the feeling of uncertainty, not really knowing exactly when this is going to be over, that's my biggest grapple.
Yeah, I know. See, the hard part is like, even if they come up with some kind of vaccine or something, there are a lot of people who will not take that vaccine.
Mm.
So
Very true.
It doesn't give the rest of us any confidence, So is someone going to go to a jazz club if 20% of 30% of the population is against vaccines? We don't know.
Yeah, and there's also just so much information out there. It's very hard to make like a decision on what to believe anymore.
Exactly.
That's another thing I'm grappling with.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, very, very strange time. My parents are both doctors, and they're in India. They're in the early 70s, and they're working, man. So, yeah, I don't even want to think about it. But
yeah.
It's also been interesting because the kind of measures a lot of people say are mandatory and should need to be put in place, they wouldn't even work in India, in a country that densely populated. No way that's going to be.
I know.
Even if you wanted to. So, yeah. Again, a lot of cognitive dissonance happening. I have no idea what to believe anymore. So I'm just kind of letting go and taking every day at a time, one day at a time.
Absolutely. That's exactly my motto right now, is just to take one day at a time. It's what else can you do? I can't think too much in the future. Probably a good lesson for us anyway.
Very much so. A good note to probably taper off this conversation. You've given me a lot of time, man. Very, very appreciative.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
This has been an extremely uplifting experience, Rez. I'm a fan. Officially, by the way, Facebook says I'm one of your top fans. So there you go.
Well, say so.
Yeah, I got a diamond logo and all that. Very proud to be one. And Ro, you've had a very, very deep impact on me as a musician and as a third culture kid. And I want to thank you for taking so much time for me today.
Thank you. And I'm a big fan of yours as well. And we should, think about doing, I know we talked about doing something via computer or whatever, but if you ever want to revisit that, we'll talk.
Oh, absolutely, man. Be sure I'm going to take you up on that someday. It's on my bucket list.
Yeah, that's all good, man. I'm here.
Awesome, brother. I'd love to connect with you musically someday. I'm just a little intimidated, and I'm going to have to get my nerves together first.
No, I'm the last guy you're being intimidated about, man. No, let me tell you.
Yeah, you see, you got to realize that at the time I discovered your music, I was an extremely traumatized jazz student. So there's that 20-year-old traumatized jazz student who always threatens to rear its head. So I'm like 41 now, but I can't still get over that guy.
That's good.
So, yeah.
Gratitude from the bottom of my heart for listening to the very end. Please consider taking a minute to subscribe to our shows so you know when the next episode is out. This is a labor of love, one I hope snowballs into one that's sustainable in its attempt to support independent thought and authentic relating. While having you as a regular member of our audience is what makes that a realistic prospect. Much love, and talk soon. Just another voice out there.